One important thing to cover when it comes to collaboration in Plastic are permissions. Now, as a few things in Plastic, the permission system at first glance will seem pretty complicated. But when you look closer, you will see that the complexity actually allows for a great flexibility that allows you to create all sorts of constellations for all sorts of teams. Now, to be honest, most of us probably won't need most of those constellations. So let's learn how to boil down the complexity into a few simple examples. The first level of that complexity that we need to understand is something called the permission hierarchy. The idea behind that is pretty simple. We already learned that in version control, we have to touch a lot of different objects and elements, like our cloud server, repositories, branches, individual files, and so on. It would be pretty complicated to have to configure each of those objects individually. So the idea is that you only try to configure the topmost objects and then touch the others only if you really need to. What do I mean by that? For example, let's say again we have our test user Cindy, and we want to grant Cindy the read permission for a certain server or organization. Now, once we do that, what will happen is that this permission will automatically be inherited by all the repositories of that organization. And for each individual repository, also its branches and paths will inherit the same permission. So we only configure the read permission once at the top, and automatically all the other objects will also have it for Cindy. Now, that is the theory. Let's see how that looks in Plastic and in Unity Cloud. The basic set of permissions you can set from both the Plastic client and Unity Cloud. However, we should start in Plastic because it has all the options, whereas the Unity Cloud side has just a reduced set of options. So here on the right side, I am in the home screen of the Plastic app. And in this one, I have a user chosen, I have his organization chosen in the cloud, and I have filtered for just one project that I'm interested in, which is this permissions project. Now the question is, where do I find the permissions hierarchy in this project or repository? So let's start with the top level and ask ourselves, well, how can we set the permissions for the cloud server? And the answer here is you will not find the word cloud, but when you go onto the top repository here under other options, you will find repository server permissions. And when we choose that, we can see we are setting the permissions for the repository server of the test user and the organization. And here we have two groups that are set by default on a Unity project, but let's not worry about them for now. What we want to add is our test user Cindy. And as we have in the picture, for now, only grant her the read permission. Now, in order for her to actually see the project, the read permission are actually two permissions, which is the read permission here. So we allow that, and the view permission down here. Just click OK. And now, according to our logic, this should have set more than just the top level permissions, but also the permissions for the repository. So let's have a look. When we go under other options again, another option here is permissions. So the repository server permissions were the permissions for the cloud server. The permissions themselves are the permissions for the repository. And when we enter that window, sure enough, here we can see Cindy, and she has the same two permissions set as we said before, just by inheritance. We haven't set them manually. So we have both of the two top objects here. Now the question is, how do we get into those nitty-gritty details at the bottom? And for that, we have to actually open the workspace. And now we have several options to change the permissions on a branch. One is obviously, as we have here on the Branches tab, just right-click and go to Permissions. And again, you can see Cindy is already here, and she has the same two permissions as before. You can also set the branch permissions from the Branch Explorer by choosing the branch and go permissions like that. But what you can also do is actually set the permissions for each and every object in your repository. It just needs to be part of the version control system already. So for example, we can choose the assets file and go under path permissions. And also here you can see Cindy's already here. Now under those path permissions, we don't have the view option anymore because the view option is actually controlling what you can see in Plastic. Here you can set individual read permissions for certain files or folders. And because she's also inheriting the read permission from before, it's already chosen here. Okay, so the inheritance thing seems pretty nice. It saves us a lot of work. But what if we actually don't want Cindy to have the inherited permissions? For example, here we have a secret file. And maybe for that secret file, we don't want Cindy to be able to access it and to be able to read it. So when we choose Cindy, what we can do in this case is to deny the read permission. And it will tell us denied permissions will override allowed permissions. And this would now prevent Cindy from reading this file. The same thing you could do with any other permission, obviously. Prevent her from adding stuff, prevent her from checking in, whatever you want to do. Now, I will not talk about this override button for now because it would just make stuff even more complicated. This override button allows for even more special constellations where you want to override just certain parts of the inheritance. Just forget about it for now. Okay, so we understood the basics of a permission hierarchy. Let's now not forget that we find corresponding settings on the Unity cloud side.